Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Abitronistim. IDSF is the leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security-oriented policies to guide the state of Israel. We are a movement of more than 20,000 people, including many reserve officers and operators from all branches of the Israel Defense establishment. Thank you, of course, to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing and our previous briefings so that we can really bring you behind the headlines what is happening here in Israel. It's a great pleasure to be joined today by Fleur, Hassan, Nahoum, as well as Emily Schrader, two very vocal voices coming out of Israel and really defending Israel on the international platform. Fleur, maybe we'll start with you. You joined us a few months ago. What can you tell us in terms of what you think has changed in this war over the past few months and how it's being perceived in the world?
I'm not a military expert, but you've had plenty of those come and speak. What I can tell you is what's going on with world sentiment at the moment, which is something that Emily and I, of course, are on the front lines of that war. And unfortunately, we are in a very heavy battle that includes a complete, I guess, renaissance, if that's the right word, of anti-Semitism. And I just honestly feel these days that this is not about Israel, but this is Israel is the conflict is the instigation of a much wider battle against Jewish people all around the world. And unfortunately, my family was kicked out of Spain 500 years ago for religious reasons. And of course, we have 100 years ago, the Holocaust and everything that happened. And this is simply another wave of anti-Semitism with the excuse of calling us colonizers, with the excuse of, the Israel-Hamas war, which is not about Israel and Hamas. It's a much wider conflict, which Emily can probably talk much length about Iran and Iran moving around its proxies. And it's essentially a war of jihadi Islamism against the free world. And Israel is in the front lines of that. But we're also in the front lines of a complete demonization of the Jewish people in the state of Israel, followed by anti-Semitism incidents around the world. And that battle is a battle that's going to take us a lot longer. I think that the Gaza war will be over before that one's over, to be honest. And we fight, but it's a very depressing thing to really kind of accept that we are really the Jewish people together, Israelis and the Jewish communities from around the world, and of course our incredible allies from the Christian world and other allies that we have, that we are really fighting a very vicious battle against the Jews and our country.
It's important to hear that because in our briefings, we're very military focused. So we look at Hamas as the enemy, Iran as the enemy, but to hear that it's a global war against anti-Semitism certainly puts a new perspective. Emily, do you have a perspective on that issue?
I mean, I think you heard really from one of the best voices in the international media speaking about what's going on. And unfortunately, I agree. I think that at the end of the day, at its core, a lot of the pushback that we're seeing, a lot of the very blatant double standards that are more prominent, I think, than perhaps ever before in the decade or so that I've been sort of tracking this narrative and this conversation surrounding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, particularly on social media. It has continuously gotten worse. And that's because the core of the problem here that has always existed throughout all of human history is anti-Semitism. It's not the only factor here, but it is a major, major component. And we have to consider that when we're looking at how to respond, whether in terms of PR or even, I'm not the expert, of course, on this, but even militarily. We have to weigh those things. We have to understand what's really happening before we're able to defeat this evil that continues to mutate over time and target the Jewish people generation after generation.
So for me, it's completely counterintuitive that after the October 7th massacre, we would have expected sympathy from the world, not an increase in anti-Semitism. What is going on? How does that happen?
Well, I knew from the... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that we had sympathy for about 24 hours, and then you saw that people really flipped. And that really speaks to both what Fleur and I are saying. And that is that at the core of the issue, there are a lot of people who have a big problem with Jews. That's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. You don't have a problem when any other minority group defends itself. You don't have a problem with the self-determination of any other minority group. You have a problem when there is police brutality or discrimination or terror attacks or any form of oppression against virtually every other minority group on earth. And yet, when it comes to the Jews, it's a different standard. And that is anti-Semitism, whether people recognize that within their own hearts or not, whether they think they're being hateful or not, that bias, that double standards, that's what anti-Semitism is. That is one of the modern forms of anti-Semitism. And we can't dance around it anymore. It doesn't help us to dance around this issue. We need to call it for what it is. And we've been afraid to do that because of a number of different, PC factors and not being able to bridge the gaps with other political views. And I understand that. And that's something we have to continue to work at. But we can't play this game where we're going to pretend that it's not anti-Semitism or it's just Israel. There's no such thing as just Israel. There's not. I've seen how people speak about this conflict for years. There's no such thing as just Israel. I'm an Israeli. I have criticism of the Israeli government. I have criticism of the IDF, but you don't see me talking the way that you see other people speaking about Israel. And there's a reason for that. It's because they harbor animosity towards Jews in their hearts.
I mean, I agree. It's the masks are off. That's the way that I see it. It's not that anti-Semitism grew overnight after October 7th, which should have been the period when people were sympathetic. But I saw somebody wrote a comment, which I completely agree with. I read a fantastic book about a year ago called People Love Dead Jews. And it's okay as long as you're the victim. It's okay as long as you've been slaughtered. Then you might get a little bit of sympathy. But the minute you fight back, that's not the Jew they want to see. And that's when the fangs come out against us. And all those people that started demonstrating were people that harbored real resentment towards Jewish people for many different reasons. And the masks were off, we smoked them out, and that's what we're seeing around the world. I mean, just this morning I was on UK radio, and they had a segment when they were talking about people desecrating Amy Winehouse's statue and somebody, wiping off Israel on a birth certificate. And I'm thinking, well, what do you want when the media has been complicit in villainizing Israel for so long? It's given people the excuse they were looking for to hate Jews. And now, of course, it comes out, and then the countries go, oh, how did this happen? Well, how did this happen? It's years and years and years of indoctrination and vilification of the only Jewish state in the world. How did this happen? How did it not happen before?
I want to add one more thing that I think is important to note, and that is that there are a lot of conflicts and a lot of voices that are in a way being silenced or more accurately ignored in the issues that they're facing today. And a lot of them are related to, the number one enemy of Israel, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran. Note, not the Iranian people, but the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, there are people in Yemen, there are people in Syria, there are people in Lebanon who are dealing with the detrimental impact of this colonization project of the Islamic Republic of Iran, how they've built up terror organizations in those countries that are destroying economies. They are destroying families. They're destroying lives in those countries, in the Arab world. And we have a very strange scenario happening now where the people of Israel are in fact in the same boat as most of the Arab world when it comes to dealing with Iran. But no one's talking about that. Even amongst these protests against Israel that you see in this whole Free Palestine movement, which really is a pro-Hamas movement, they're pro-Houthis. They're pro-Houthis in Yemen. And the Houthis are a terror organization backed by Iran, or the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has oppressed the Yemeni people. And yet you're not hearing those voices. You're not hearing that conversation in the international media. And that's a byproduct of the disproportionate obsession with criticizing primarily the state of Israel. And that is not fair to the rest of the human rights abuses and the rest of the conflicts in the Middle East. Those voices in Lebanon and Syria and Yemen who are suffering under the Islamic Republic of Iran deserve to be heard, and those conflicts should be brought to light. Also, of course, we can't forget what's happening in Africa with the conflict in Sudan, the oppression of Muslim communities there. Nobody even talks about this. Nobody's even aware that this is happening, and that is unacceptable.
I mean, and just to add to what Emily's saying, What about the moderate countries of the Gulf that got rid of their version of Hamas already 10 years ago? Saudi Arabia getting rid of its fundamentalists, the UAE, Bahrain, Egypt. Israel helped Egypt get rid of their fundamentalists. And so nobody talks about that, of course. It's only when Jews are involved and our fight back, that's what gets the headlines, and not when everybody else gets rid of their fundamentalists, which is a very justified thing to do. And like Emily said, you know, you have in England people marching, oh, you know, for the victory of the Houthis that are attacking British naval assets. You can't make this up.
Okay, so a lot of this war against anti-Semitism seems to be the perceptions from the West. And I assume when you two are speaking on international media, you're speaking in English to people who understand English. And it seems, therefore, we're fighting this war against anti-Semitism, maybe a losing proposition if there's a growth of anti-Semitism. I'd be curious to know how this is playing out in the Arab world, as you just mentioned, meaning as much as we're trying to fight perception in the UK and the US, what is the perception amongst the moderate Arabs in the Middle East? And our fight with anti-Semitism, does that spill over, or does that have any impact on what's happening with the Gulf states?
So I'll just say that I'm actually optimistic about the Gulf states, and I know this might seem a little bit deluded, but I'll tell you why. Look, they're not, the Palestinian cause has always played very well in the Muslim street, and that's why the Islamic Republic of Iran, as Emily mentioned, they actually use the Palestinian cause because they're not even Arabs. They don't care about the Palestinians, let's be honest. But they use it as a tool to gain public sympathy for their evil and sinister plans to take over the world, okay, or to change the world order, let's put it that way. But why I see this as very positive, what's going on in the Gulf states, is that about a month into the war, the Arab League met, and they tried to pass 3 boycotts, one against American bases in the Gulf and 2 against Israel, and they couldn't pass it. So let me just repeat that. The Arab League could not pass a boycott against Israel. Now, in this part of the world, that's progress. And even though the people may be a little annoyed, I can tell you, you know, that it's kind of business as usual. It's just much more low key at the moment. And the governments of the moderate Gulf states that signed the Abraham Accords, and even Saudi Arabia that hasn't signed yet, they have a long-term goal here with Israel, and they're not canceling or rolling back anything. On the contrary, Saudi Arabia has doubled down about wanting to make peace with Israel because they know, like, that the real enemy, as Emily mentioned, is the Islamic Republic of Iran, and that's their enemy as much as it's our enemy. So in the long term, I'm actually optimistic about the growth and the continuation of the Abraham Accords.
Emily, when you mentioned the Iranian Republic, you mentioned the government and not the people. So do you share the sentiment that you think there's opportunity with the people of the Middle East, the people of Iran?
I mean, of course, especially with Iran. Now, of course, it's not an Arab country. They're Persian, as well as a number of other ethnicities included under that umbrella. But the reality on the ground is that the majority, unlike Gaza, the majority of the people in Iran support Israel. The majority of them want relations with Israel. We had relations with them. We have thousands of years of history between the Persian people and the people of Israel, historically speaking. So it's a very different dynamic from the start than what you see in the Arab world. We never had a war with Iran, okay? That wasn't, we don't have a existential conflict with them, whereas we did multiple times with the Arab world. So there isn't that hump to get over for the people of Iran. That being said, they're in a pretty bad position. I mean, 45 years now of brutal oppression. The same tactics that we saw from Hamas on October 7th are straight from the playbook of the Islamic Republic of Iran and what they do to their own people. So that's why you see for the first time a lot of Iranians in the diaspora and also inside of Iran. I get messages all the time from Iranians in Iran saying, we support you, we stand with Israel, we support you in the fight against Hamas, because they understand what's happening. They understand what these organizations do. They understand the level of depravity of Hamas, of Hezbollah, of the Islamic Republic, and how their government has assisted and made these tragedies possible throughout the region. So they're very outspoken and very much against what's happening at the government level. They're just not really in a position, practically speaking, to overthrow this regime, despite trying multiple times. And I could spend another 3 hours talking about what the West should do in response to support the people of Iran that does not, in fact, include a war. But, you know, it's the opposite situation of what we see in Gaza, where you have the majority of people who do support Hamas, and not only that, who condone the actions of October 7th and who celebrated in the streets. I think there's a lot more incitement and hate speech in the Arab world. However, I also agree with Fleur that I think that the future of the Middle East is going to be one of normalization and cooperation, even if only for their self-interest. And you know what? I don't care. If it brings us peace, I'm okay with that. When, you know, if one person succeeds, then hopefully all of us can succeed. But we do have a long way to go, especially when it comes to Syria, Lebanon, even Jordan and Egypt, whom we have peace with. In terms of what the people think, there's a long, long path ahead of us before we can have any sort of normalization with them. But in the long run, I do think that that is what will eventually happen. Now the question is, how do we get to that point? How do you sort of undo the brainwashing of so much of Palestinian society and the level of hatred and pure violent anti-Semitism that they think is fantastic? This is not the path forward, not for them, certainly not for us, and not for anyone else in the Arab or Muslim world.
I just want to add to that in the many demonstrations that I've been a part of outside of of Israel, you know, the Iranian people are there at those demonstrations. The other day, there was a man who got arrested by British police for standing with a sign saying Hamas are terrorists. They really are being incredible allies, the Iranian people, who know exactly what we're dealing with here. And also, I want to say, to reiterate what we were saying earlier, that yes, it is self-interest. So Saudi Arabia has self-interest. They want a defense pact with the US. So what? That's good. We share an enemy and we need to share resources to fight that enemy. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's how things are done in the Middle East and everywhere else in the world.
So many of our viewers are keyboard warriors. They post on social media, they write to their elected officials, they write op-eds. In this war against anti-Semitism, against hate, you two are at the forefront. What would you recommend to focus on? How would you recommend spreading whatever message it is to the world at this time? Emily, you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I'll start. I may be a little bit biased because it's sort of my area of focus, of expertise, but I really truly believe that the path forward to actually changing the Middle East and seeing the path that began really with the Abraham Accords, to seeing that path fulfilled is by eliminating the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I don't mean that by dropping bombs on them necessarily, but what an individual can do to support the people of Iran, to call for regime change in democratic countries where they have the privilege that the people of Iran don't have, of voting and choosing their elected officials, is to bug them constantly about this issue. Call for stronger sanctions, call for sanction enforcement, call for a zero tolerance approach, call for designation of the IRGC outside of the United States where they already recognized it, but in Europe. These steps are important to holding the regime accountable for the crimes against humanity that they are funding and enabling around the world, especially, of course, in the Middle East and within Iran itself. But that doesn't change unless we show elected officials that we care about what's happening and that we understand that there's a link between those terrorist organizations and the funding and the programs that they're doing beyond just the nuclear program. If we show elected officials that that is an important agenda item, then that will be reflected in policy. And we have that privilege in democratic nations. And so I really want to call on people to raise awareness of this issue, to speak about it on social media, to write op-eds, to write to their elected officials, to call them every day if they can. to call them every day and just say, this issue is very important to us. Right now, there's a bill on the books, the Masa Act, which is additional targeted sanctions for some of the officials of the Islamic Republic of Iran. This is very, very important in the United States. Pay attention to this issue legislatively because it affects us on the ground in Israel. It affects lives in the Middle East. It might seem like nothing. It might seem like nonsense on social media to you, and you don't see how you can actually make a difference. It can make a difference. Please engage. Please speak about this issue. Speak about it because it's important for us as Israelis. But frankly, even if you're pro-Palestinian, it should be important to you because there's no future for those people. There's no future for the people of the Middle East if we continue to see this terrorism and this funding and support of terrorism from the Islamic Republic of Iran.
I would agree that, unfortunately, we have a world full of Chamberlains who are trying to appease a predator country that has made it very clear what they want. They've said they want to destroy Israel. Doesn't seem to bother anyone. And really, what we need is a few more Churchills, people to stand up. And I don't know whether I agree with Emily. I think that eventually we will end up at war. I mean, the free world will end up having to do a war with Iran. And unfortunately, bombs may have to be used in the end. But if we would just boycott and sanction Iran, maybe we will give the people more strength to overthrow their own regime, which would be really ideal. But on top of that, a lot of people are asking, what can we do? I want to say two things. One is be proud and strong of who you are as Jews or as allies to Jews. Our Christian community have been so wonderful with us. And just keep speaking. Don't let anybody intimidate you. A lot of those keyboard warriors from the other side are cowards. And really, and when you confront them with facts, they kind of fall to the wayside and fall apart. So let's, have our heads held up high, who we are, what we've built here on nothing, and how we built this incredible country. And we are not victims, but we will fight for our rights. And so everybody in the diaspora should be strengthened. And also you should be strengthened by the lights at the end of the tunnel. And for me, there's two or three very obvious ones. The first one is the unity and resilience of Israel and the Jewish people and the knowledge that we're one. That's, we could have talked about Israel and the diaspora for many years, but now I think it's very clear that we're one. We're one people, we're one family, and we have to keep fighting. And the second thing is the strength I get from the people here, many of them victims who had to leave their homes and from the South. And they tell me we're going to build the South back bigger and better. And I think this is just the story of the Jewish people. Yes, they keep trying to kill us, but we come out fighting bigger and better, and we will prevail. And, Am Israel.
Fleur and Emily, thank you so much for joining. I know that our viewers are eating up all of your words. And with your permission, we always send out the recording of the briefing afterwards so people can catch it afterwards on YouTube. We're going to send out your links to social media because I know you both post a lot, and it's incredible to follow everything that you're doing to support and defend Israel. So everyone who's writing...
Everybody should watch our show. Emily and I have a show. It's called The Quad. It's on JNS. Everybody watch our show. It's poignant, intelligent, and sometimes even funny.
Amazing. And I see that linked in your social media. So if they go to social media, can they get through there? Or we should also we'll send out an additional link to that as well. And I think General Avivi, are you on the call with us?
Yes, Moshe,
yes.
I'm here.
Amazing. General, are you able to...
Thank you very much. It was fascinating, truly. I'll say that I just went out from a meeting with the Amir Baram, the deputy of the chief of staff of the IDF, a long meeting, very interesting. I can say that the army is in full readiness to go to Rafah. We are operating still in Khan Yunis with many achievements, and as long as we have effective operation and we get intelligence and we manage to destroy the enemy, we are continuing also in Khan Yunis. And we have a division with 2 brigades that is operating in North Gaza, so we are maintaining all the time contact with the terrorists in North Gaza, destroying infrastructure. Yesterday, they killed more than 40 terrorists in the northern part of Gaza. So we're continuing to move forward. I felt that overall the morale is very high in the army. The army is also preparing for a possible war in Lebanon, which at the moment seems pretty imminent. And the units are training and equipping and doing everything they need. So maybe the next briefing, Moshe, I'll go into more details about many issues that came up in this meeting, which we can talk about.
Wonderful. That's a teaser for the next briefing. Thank you, Fleur, Emily, General Avivi, for sharing with us today. Thank you, of course, to all of our viewers and supporters for joining this briefing. We will be back with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.